Old racist judge laughs at teen, shocked to find out he's a big-time lawyer. The humid night air shimmered, painted in gaudy hues by the cruiser's rotating lights. David Miller, called Jamal by his mother, steered his rented sedan onto the gravelly shoulder of the narrow highway. A cloud of ochre dust puffed out, settling like a film on the tenacious honeysuckle clinging to the roadside fence. When he cut the engine, the sudden void magnified the insect chorus, crickets shrilling, cicadas humming their electric song. Deputy Roy Tillman, suspicion carved deep into the lines of his face, ambled toward the car. His hand hovered near his holstered weapon, a gesture less about procedure than intimidation. "Evening," Jamal greeted him, his tone smooth, as Tillman leaned into the open window. The flashlight beam, an unwelcome probe, stabbed at his eyes. "License and registration," Tillman grunted, his tone implying guilt before innocence. Jamal complied, his movements measured. He handed over the requested items, acutely aware of Tillman's gaze lingering on his complexion. This was more than a stop. It was a calculated tableau of power, a reminder of the town's deeply ingrained prejudices. Tillman scrutinized the documents, his brow furrowed as if grappling with a complex equation. "Out-of-state plates. What brings you to Macomb County?" "Visiting family," Jamal stated, his voice carefully neutral. He refused to offer Tillman the satisfaction of a reaction. "Family, huh? Which family?" Skepticism dripped from Tillman's words. "My mother's side. The Jeffersons." Perhaps the name would resonate, provide a modicum of buffer. The Jeffersons, while not affluent, commanded respect within the black community, known for their quiet resolve and work ethic. Tillman's expression remained impassive. "Step out of the vehicle, son. Am I being detained, officer?" Jamal inquired, his voice even, yet edged with resolve. He knew his rights, had painstakingly learned them. Tillman's grip tightened on the flashlight. "Don't get wise. Just exit the car." Jamal emerged, his senses heightened. The air, thick with pine and damp earth, pressed in. The only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and the pervasive quiet of the woods. He stood erect, meeting Tillman's gaze head-on. "Hands on the hood," Tillman barked. Jamal paused, a heartbeat's defiance, then obeyed. The sun-baked metal seared through his thin shirt. He was being demeaned, forced into a public exhibition of authority, all because of his skin. Anger flickered beneath his controlled demeanor, a slow burn threatening to ignite. Tillman patted him down, his touch bordering on violation. He found nothing, of course. Jamal was a Harvard-trained lawyer, not some backwoods delinquent. But that was irrelevant here. In Macomb County, he was simply another black man, vulnerable to the biases of the local constabulary. "What's in the trunk?" Tillman's voice was a blunt instrument. "Luggage," Jamal replied, his jaw clenched. "Personal effects." "Open it." Jamal moved to the rear and released the latch. Tillman's flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a suitcase, a garment bag, and a box overflowing with books. "What are you, some kind of intellectual?" Tillman sneered, grabbing a book. He rifled through the pages, a puzzled frown creasing his face. "Law books?" "Yes," Jamal said, his tone clipped and precise. "I'm an attorney." Tillman's eyes narrowed. He seemed to shrink, some of his swagger dissolving. He realized he'd overreached. Retreat, however, was not an option. "Well, an attorney should know better than to speed through a school zone," Tillman countered, regaining a semblance of his previous authority. "That's why I stopped you." "Speeding." Jamal remained silent. He hadn't been speeding, had meticulously monitored his speed, knowing even a minor infraction would be exploited. "I'm writing you a ticket," Tillman said, hastily scribbling on a pad. He thrust the citation at Jamal, avoiding eye contact. "You can pay it online or appear in court." Jamal accepted the ticket, their fingers briefly connecting. A wave of revulsion washed over him. This had nothing to do with speed. It was about dominance, control, a stark reminder of his perceived place in Macomb County's hierarchy. As Jamal slid back into his sedan, a familiar vehicle pulled up behind the cruiser, An aging Cadillac, adorned with a county judge's parking permit. Judge Samuel Harding emerged, his face ruddy in the flashing lights. He approached Tillman, placing a hand on his shoulder, and spoke in muted tones. Jamal couldn't discern their words, but he saw Harding glance his way. The judge's expression held curiosity mingled with something else, an element Jamal couldn't quite name. The exchange was brief. Harding returned to his Cadillac, and Tillman, after a hesitant pause, waved Jamal onward. As he drove off, Jamal checked his rearview mirror. Tillman and Harding watched him, their silhouettes stark against the pulsing lights. He sensed this was far from over. This was merely a prelude. Maycomb's peculiar brand of justice had a habit of pursuing you, clinging like the ochre dust to your clothes. The gavel's mockery. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the stagnant air mirroring the oppressive weight of Judge Harding's presence. Jamal felt pinned beneath that hawkish stare. David Miller. The judge drawled, each syllable coated in a sugary disdain that prickled Jamal's skin. Aggravated assault, wouldn't you say this diverges sharply from your wholesome image? A low murmur rippled through the gallery, a chorus of agreement largely from the elder spectators. Harding, clearly gratified, leaned back, his leather chair groaning like an ancient grievance. He adjusted his necktie, a gaudy emblem of Confederate flags, and resumed his derision. A scholarship student pursuing a career as a lawyer? A dry, scraping chuckle rasped through the room. Ambitious. I'll grant you that. But the law, Mr. Miller, is a precision instrument, not a cudgel for impulsive actions. Jamal met the judge's gaze, refusing to flinch. Harding sought shame, perhaps terror. He found only a quiet, unyielding determination that seemed to fuel the judge's ire. Mr. Miller, how do you plead? The question was barely a gesture. Guilt was already the verdict, etched in Harding's mind, likely in most present as well. Jamal rose, each movement measured and deliberate. His suit, though humble, was immaculate. He embodied the aspiring lawyer Harding had just ridiculed. Not guilty, Your Honor. The words resonated, a defiance against the carefully curated narrative of privilege Harding had championed his entire life. A tick pulsed in his jaw. Not guilty? On what basis, may I ask? Self-defense, Your Honor, Jamal stated, his tone clear and strong. I acted to defend myself from an unprovoked attack. Harding snorted. Unprovoked? By a pillar of this community? A man of your stature? He indicated the plaintiff's table where a stout man sat with a smug expression. Difficult to credit. With respect, Your Honor, Jamal pressed, respectful yet resolute. The evidence will demonstrate that Mr. Henderson initiated the conflict. Evidence? Harding thundered, the veneer of genteel southerner cracking. What evidence could possibly refute the testimony of a respected businessman? He brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. A waste of this court's time. I know your type. Thinking you can come in here, disturb the peace, and hide behind a fabricated claim of self-defense? Jamal stood firm, shoulders square, his gaze fixed on the judge. This wasn't about facts, he knew, but about the preservation of power, about maintaining the established order. Nausea churned in his stomach, a bitter wave as the immensity of his challenge crashed down. The air in the courtroom tasted of prejudice, thick and suffocating. He caught glimpses of veiled smirks and hostile glares. But he also saw small sparks of hope in other eyes, a silent encouragement that steeled his resolve. He would stand his ground. He would fight, not just for himself, but for those others betrayed by a gavel-wielding injustice. The judge's derision would not be the final answer. #Justice for Jamal. Before noon, #Justice for Jamal had exploded across social media. The catalyst, a shaky, low-resolution clip, secretly recorded from the courtroom gallery. Judge Harding's dismissive chortle, amplified by countless devices, served as an accelerant. Jamal's face, initially composed, then shattered, became the symbol of institutional inequity. News sites, Twitter feeds, and TikTok timelines were inundated with furious commentary. Demands for the judge's removal, calls for thorough investigations, and the ubiquitous hashtag fueled the digital conflagration. In her sun-drenched Atlanta office, Evelyn Reed watched the footage on her massive display, a frown creasing her forehead, a tick pulsing in her cheek. Beyond her, the city skyline shimmered in the morning light. "Repugnant," she declared, pivoting to face her legal team. 3 associates sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions mirroring her own indignation. "Jamal. That young man possessed the fortitude to confront that dinosaur, only to be met with blatant contempt. This is a familiar narrative, isn't it?" Evelyn's voice, normally smooth, now possessed a distinct, cutting edge. "Disturbingly so, Ms. Reed," responded Sarah, the team's junior member, her voice taut with barely controlled anger. "It's the insidious dehumanization that's so infuriating. The presumption of culpability predicated solely on race." "Precisely," Evelyn affirmed, leaning forward intently. "This extends beyond a single judge, a solitary case. It's indicative of a system engineered to crush individuals." She tapped a perfectly lacquered nail against the table. "I want every scrap of information you can unearth on Judge Harding. Every decision, every complaint, every hushed allegation. Let's determine whether this is an anomaly or a demonstrably established trend." Her gaze swept over them, demanding their full attention. "And locate Jamal. I need to speak with him." Back in his modest apartment, David surveyed the digital wildfire he'd helped ignite. The media now framed him as Jamal, victim of judicial prejudice. A wry smile touched his lips. Jamal had served his purpose. Now, it was time for David Miller, attorney at law, to step onto the stage, but discretion remained paramount. He retrieved a battered leather briefcase from beneath his bed. Within, nestled amongst legal pads and meticulously ordered files, lay a comprehensive dossier. Harding's history, a chronicle of prejudiced verdicts, callous indifference, and blatant disregard for due process. David had dedicated months to its creation, diligently amassing evidence, constructing a case that transcended the single, inflammatory courtroom incident. He reached for his phone. Evelyn Reed's number glowed on the screen. He paused, then pressed dial. "Ms. Reed," he stated, his voice carefully controlled, devoid of any echo of the distressed Jamal from yesterday's hearing. "David Miller. I understand you were seeking me." "Mr. Miller," Evelyn responded, her tone composed and professional. "Indeed. I understand you represented yourself yesterday?" "Correct," David confirmed. "I deemed it essential to experience the legal process firsthand. A sobering lesson, I imagine," Evelyn remarked, a hint of dryness in her tone. "Mr. Miller, I've reviewed the video. I've analyzed the reports. I believe you possess a compelling case for judicial malfeasance." "I concur," David asserted, his grip tightening on the device. "And I intend to pursue it with every resource at my disposal." "Excellent," Evelyn replied. "Because I believe we can offer significant assistance." David exhaled slowly. The wheels were in motion. The initial move had been made. But this was merely the prologue. The true challenge lay ahead, dismantling a deeply entrenched system from within. He understood the stakes. He anticipated the scrutiny. But he was prepared. He had to be. For Jamal, and for every individual silenced by the judge's gavel. Undercover in Macomb. Dust devils danced around the Ford's tires as David, reborn as Jamal, crossed into Macomb County. The very name constricted his breathing. The air hung thick, a miasma of unspoken codes and the specters of past wrongs. He pulled into a gas station, a solitary ebony figure amid alabaster faces. The attendant, a lean man with eyes like chips of flint, offered only a curt nod. Jamal topped off the tank, paid in greenbacks, and resumed his journey, the silence inside the car amplifying the frantic drumming of his pulse. The courthouse rose in the distance, a stony testament to eschewed justice. Parking a block away, he lingered, wanting to acclimate, to let the atmosphere seep into his bones before venturing into the viper's nest. His pace was deliberate as he observed the townsfolk. Set mouths, averted eyes, the collective judgment felt like a tangible weight pressing down. Inside, the air tasted of aged paper and festering bias. Deputy Roy Tillman, his bulk straining the seams of his uniform, guarded the courtroom entrance. Suspicion narrowed his gaze, tracking Jamal's every movement. "Lost son?" Tillman drawled, "The son," a barbed insult. Jamal held his gaze, refusing to yield. "I'm here for the Harding case," he stated, his voice a study in composure. Tillman peeled himself off the doorframe, his eyes performing a slow, insolent inventory. "And your business with Judge Harding is?" "Potential witness," Jamal replied, offering nothing more. He scrutinized Tillman's posture, the subtle clenching of his jaw. "Witness, huh?" Tillman's scoff echoed. "Don't recall seeing you around these parts. Relatively new to the area," Jamal explained. "Moved here last month." He offered a disarming smile, hoping it would smooth the waters, but Tillman remained impassive. "What do you do?" Tillman grilled, his tone sharp with accusation. "Landscaping," Jamal answered, the carefully crafted lie rolling easily off his tongue. "Just trying to earn a living." He met the deputy's stare, projecting a meekness that chafed. Tillman grunted, unconvinced. "Well, just keep your nose clean. We don't cotton to trouble." He stepped aside, granting passage. Awaiting his turn within the courtroom, the air thrummed with anticipation. Jamal took a seat in the rear, observing Judge Samuel Harding. The man presided with puffed-up importance, his pronouncements booming across the vaulted chamber. He watched Harding summarily dismiss a black woman's petty theft case with a brusque remark and a flick of his wrist. Barely out of her teens, she desperately protested her innocence, but Harding silenced her, his face a mask. The sentence was cruelly disproportionate. Then, a white man accused of assault received a slap on the wrist, a barely perceptible wink from Judge Harding sealing the deal. The injustice was blatant, a bitter draft in Jamal's throat. He clenched his fists, the rage a banked fire beneath his carefully constructed calm. Harding, with his thinning hair plastered artfully across his scalp and his tailored suit, presented an image of southern refinement, but Jamal saw the decay festering underneath. He saw the hubris, the condescension, the ingrained prejudice that informed every judgment. He needed to tread carefully. He must play the part, gather the facts, understand the labyrinthine workings of this corrupt system before he could strike. He would weaponize their prejudice. He would exploit their arrogance as a shield. He would expose Harding, a dinosaur clinging to power through fear and manipulation. The thought sparked a cold satisfaction, a steely resolve that hardened his features. The burden of his mission settled upon him. A lone wolf in hostile territory, he felt no fear. He was Jamal now, and he was ready for war. The deputy's testimony. Deputy Tillman, his face the color of sun-baked clay, adjusted his belt buckle, the metal glinting under the courtroom's harsh fluorescent lights. He'd planted himself squarely in the witness box, radiating an air of reluctant importance. "Deputy Tillman," David began, his voice calm, even, a stark contrast to the simmering tension in the room. "You testified that you pulled me over for a broken taillight. Is that correct?" Tillman puffed out his chest. "That's right. Driver was in violation. Clear as day." David nodded slowly. "And you noted this broken taillight before initiating the traffic stop?" "Sure did. Could you describe the condition of the taillight for the court?" David leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. Tillman shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it was broken. Cracked. Didn't light up right." "Cracked, you say? Was it a large crack? Enough to obscure the light entirely?" "Enough to warrant a stop," Tillman repeated, his voice tightening. David reached into his satchel and produced a photograph, enlarged and mounted on foam core. He approached the witness stand and presented it to Tillman. "Deputy, I'd like you to examine Exhibit A. This is a photograph taken by my associate shortly after my arrest. Does this photo accurately depict the condition of the taillight on my vehicle?" Tillman squinted at the photo. The taillight, while showing a hairline fracture barely visible to the naked eye, was undeniably intact and illuminated. "It looks different in the photo." "Different how, Deputy?" David pressed. Judge Harding shifted in his seat. A barely perceptible tick pulsed in his left cheek. Mr. Miller, are you suggesting the deputy is lying under oath? I am simply seeking clarification, Your Honor, David replied, his voice laced with steel. Deputy Tillman stated the taillight was cracked. Exhibit A shows a hairline fracture, almost imperceptible. Was this fracture sufficient to impede the taillight's function? Tillman's face was now a shade darker than his uniform. Look, it was dark. I saw what I saw. Dark, David echoed. But the taillight was illuminated, wasn't it? As the photo clearly shows. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Deputy Tillman, is it possible that you were mistaken? Perhaps you were focusing on other factors when you decided to initiate the traffic stop? Harding slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing through the courtroom. Enough! Mr. Miller, I will not allow you to badger the witness. Stick to the facts. David ignored the judge's outburst, his attention fixed on Tillman. Deputy, prior to initiating the stop, did you run a check on the vehicle's license plate? Tillman hesitated, his eyes darting nervously towards Harding. Yes, I did. And what information did that license plate check reveal? Just the vehicle registration. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing out of the ordinary. So, the vehicle was properly registered, insured, everything was in order. And yet you still chose to pull it over for a barely visible crack in a taillight? Harding interrupted again, his voice sharp. Mr. Miller, I am warning you. This line of questioning is irrelevant. David turned to face the judge, his expression calm but resolute. Your Honor, I believe it is highly relevant. I am attempting to demonstrate the pretextual nature of this traffic stop. The alleged broken taillight was merely an excuse. An excuse for what? Harding challenged, his voice dripping with sarcasm. David met the judge's gaze directly. An excuse to stop a young black man driving a decent car in this county. The courtroom erupted. A murmur rippled through the gallery, a mixture of shock and nervous excitement. Harding's face flushed crimson. He pounded his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but the air remained thick with tension, charged with the unspoken realities that hung heavy in the room. David remained silent, letting his words sink in. He knew he was walking a tightrope, but he also knew he had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He glanced at Tillman, who was sweating visibly, his gaze fixed on the floor. The subtle cracks in the deputy's composure were starting to show, just like the hairline fracture in that taillight. The truth unveiled. Deputy Tillman's eyes narrowed as David, or rather Jamal as everyone knew him, approached the courtroom door. Court's about to reconvene. You sure you got business here, boy? Jamal took a deep breath, the stale air of the courthouse heavy in his lungs. He straightened his worn jacket. Yes, sir. I do. Tillman grunted, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. He stepped aside just enough for Jamal to squeeze past. The courtroom was buzzing, a low hum of anticipation vibrating in the air. Judge Harding was already seated, his face a mask of bored disdain as he shuffled through some papers. Jamal walked directly to the stand, ignoring the curious stares and the muttering. He raised his right hand before anyone could stop him. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. His voice, amplified by the sudden silence, echoed through the room. Judge Harding looked up, his eyes widening in recognition and then narrowing in annoyance. Jamal, is it? What is the meaning of this disruption? I have half a mind to hold you in contempt. Jamal met the judge's gaze, his own unwavering. With all due respect, Your Honor, my name is not Jamal. It is David Miller. And I am an attorney with Reed, Thompson, and Davies. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. A collective gasp swept through the room. Heads swiveled, whispers erupted, a chaotic symphony of disbelief. Even Deputy Tillman seemed momentarily stunned, his hand now firmly on his gun, but his eyes wide with confusion. Judge Harding's face turned a shade of purple that threatened to burst. He slammed his gavel with enough force to make several people jump. Silence! I will have order in my courtroom! He glared at Jamal, his eyes blazing. You expect me to believe that you are a lawyer? With Reed, Thompson, and Davies? Preposterous. It's the truth, Your Honor. David reached inside his jacket, pulling out a leather wallet. He extracted his bar card and approached the bench, placing it directly in front of the judge. Bar number 14792. Admitted to practice in this state for the past 5 years. Harding snatched the card, his eyes darting over it, searching for any sign of forgery. The color drained from his face as he confirmed the details. He looked up at David, his mouth agape. But the clothes, the way you acted. David allowed a hint of a smile to play on his lips. I wanted to see the system firsthand, Your Honor. To understand how justice is truly dispensed in this town. And I must say, my experience has been enlightening. The courtroom was in an uproar. The murmurs had grown into full-blown conversations, punctuated by gasps and exclamations. People were pointing, whispering, and shaking their heads in disbelief. The air crackled with tension, thick with the weight of the revelation. Harding pounded his gavel again, but the noise only subsided slightly. He looked around the courtroom, his usual aura of authority shattered. He was a man adrift, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. This is unprecedented, he stammered, his voice barely audible above the din. He looked at David, a flicker of something that might have been fear in his eyes. What do you intend to do with this charade? David leaned forward, his voice low but clear. I intend to ensure that justice is served, Your Honor. And I intend to expose the prejudice and inequality that I have witnessed in this very courtroom. Starting with this case. He glanced over at the teenager, a flicker of hope in his eyes. This young man deserves a fair trial. Harding's face hardened. You think you can come in here and disrupt the order of things? You think you can challenge me? David met his gaze, his own unwavering. I believe I can, Your Honor. And I believe I will. Evidence of prejudice. The courtroom atmosphere was charged, thick with anticipation. David, his former identity as Jamal now subsumed by purpose, stood before the plaintiff's table, a thin folder his only weapon. Judge Harding, perched high above, projected an air of patronizing amusement. Evelyn Reed, seated beside David, offered a discreet nod of encouragement. Mr. Miller, Harding drawled, the honorific dripping with thinly veiled contempt. Are we quite done with these baseless claims? I have a calendar to manage. David met the judge's gaze, unwavering. Not yet, Your Honor. We are about to introduce compelling evidence of a pattern, judicial partiality, specifically directed at cases involving people of color. A collective murmur swept the room. Harding's complexion darkened. Insolence! Retract that statement immediately, young man, or face the consequences of your contempt. I intend to substantiate it, Your Honor. David replied steadily, opening the folder. Exhibit A, the transcript from the 1998 case of State v. Thomas. Within this record, Your Honor, you are quoted as saying, we can't expect these people to understand the law's finer points. Instinct governs them, not intellect. A gasp echoed from the gallery. Harding spluttered. That transcript is devoid of context. We possess the entire document, Your Honor. David countered. And the context merely amplifies the prejudice. Furthermore, in that same trial, you dismissed the defense objection concerning jury composition, facilitating the prosecution's removal of all prospective black jurors. The verdict, unsurprisingly, was guilty. He proceeded, unveiling case after case, Rodriguez versus City of Oak Haven, Jackson versus Consolidated Industries, each a tableau of Harding's prejudicial statements and rulings, meticulously documented. The folder seemed to swell, weighted down by each new revelation. Then came the witnesses. Maria Sanchez, a paralegal with 15 years of courthouse experience, recounted witnessing Harding's derogatory remarks toward Latino defendants. He freely labeled them lazy and unreliable within the courthouse walls. She testified, her voice wavering slightly. Next, Charles Peterson, a former public defender, a black man who had since abandoned the field, detailed the constant struggle he faced arguing before Harding. "He refused to acknowledge me," Peterson stated. "He treated me as if I were transparent, my arguments irrelevant. And the decisions, they invariably favored the white parties." Harding shifted, his face now a rigid mask of suppressed fury. He attempted to object, to undermine the witness's credibility, but Evelyn Reed skillfully deflected each maneuver. Finally, David presented what he believed would be the most impactful piece of proof: a letter Harding penned to a college peer in 1972, unearthed from the university's archives. In it, Harding decried the burgeoning civil rights movement, writing, "These people are becoming far too assertive. It's time they remembered their place." The courtroom was hushed. Even the court reporter seemed to hold her breath. Harding's carefully cultivated image of Southern dignity disintegrated. He resembled a trapped creature, his gaze darting around, seeking a means of escape. This is an outrage," he stammered. "A personal assault. These are private communications. They reflect your deeply ingrained beliefs, Your Honor," David declared, his voice resonating with conviction. "Beliefs that have demonstrably shaped your judgments from this bench. Beliefs that have robbed countless individuals of their right to impartial justice." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "Judge Harding, you have violated the trust reposed in you. You have perverted your power. And you are no longer worthy to serve as a judge in this court." The tide turns. The air in Macomb hung thick and still, a suffocating blanket. David felt its clammy touch as he stood waiting, the stagnant atmosphere echoing the disquiet that had seized the town. Then, a tremor of anticipation ran through the small group clustered outside the courthouse. A black sedan, polished to a blinding sheen under the sun's glare, glided to a halt. Evelyn Reed emerged. Her stride, purposeful and unwavering, sliced through the oppressive tension. Her sharply tailored suit was a beacon against the backdrop of faded denim and worn cottons. Cameras erupted, their flashes a frenetic dance of light. With a simple, commanding gesture, Evelyn silenced the clamor. Her voice, amplified by the makeshift podium, rang out clear and strong. "I'm here today in solidarity with David Miller," she declared, her gaze encompassing the assembled faces. "Justice demands impartiality, accessibility, and clear vision. Recent events in this community suggest a need for a much closer look. Our intention is to ensure equity prevails and that truth emerges." Watching, David felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Evelyn's presence radiated assurance and tangible strength, a welcome promise in a battle that had felt crushingly isolating. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harding's face was a rigid mask of barely leashed fury. He fixed a venomous stare upon Evelyn, who sat beside David, a haven of composure amidst the brewing storm. "Ms. Reed," he began, his tone dripping with contempt, "I presume you are familiar with the decorum expected in these proceedings." "Indeed, Your Honor," Evelyn replied, her voice smooth as river stone. "And I trust you recognize the impropriety of continuing this case given the, shall we say, anomalies that have come to our attention." Harding's knuckles whitened as he grasped the gavel. "Anomalies? To what are you alluding?" "The, shall we say, discrepancies in your reported finances, Your Honor," Evelyn parried, her gaze unwavering. "And the remarkable coincidence of your son's recent business ventures with the plaintiff's family." A collective intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Harding's face darkened. He stammered, attempting to regain his composure, but Evelyn persisted. "Furthermore, Your Honor, I must bring to the court's notice your documented history of biased remarks, both in chambers and elsewhere, concerning individuals of Mr. Miller's background. These utterances certainly call into question your capacity to preside over this case with impartiality." The silence in the room became absolute. Harding's carefully constructed veneer of Southern charm disintegrated. He slammed the gavel with a force that reverberated through the room. "This is preposterous. I will not tolerate these accusations." "Then I suggest you excuse yourself from this case, Your Honor," Evelyn stated, her voice unwavering. After what seemed an age of charged silence, Harding, his face a patchwork of anger and defeat, finally conceded. I recused myself from this case. A wave of relief washed over the onlookers. The momentum had shifted. The appointment of a newcomer, a jurist from beyond the county known for even-handedness and fairness, brought a hesitant optimism. The machinery of justice, though ponderous, started to move in a new direction. But the struggle was far from finished. The scrutiny Evelyn had directed at Maycomb also exposed the ingrained corruption and prejudice that festered within its institutions. Rumors of investigations circulated through the town like the tremors before a major quake. The established powers, used to operating in the shadows, felt the unaccustomed sting of public attention. Apprehension, bordering on panic, began to take hold. The comfortable illusion of inviolability crumbled, supplanted by the stark realization of accountability. A new day in Maycomb. The Maycomb morning assaulted rather than embraced, its glare a harsh interrogator. More than just illumination had shifted, a taut expectancy gripped the air, like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. David's lawsuit had shattered the town's polished facade, revealing the termite-eaten supports underneath. Sweeping reforms, fueled by national censure and federal mandate, were being implemented with deliberate, grudging strokes. Justice, once a twisted mockery, was now being pursued with painstaking rigor. Voter registration efforts bloomed, championed by citizens who had formerly looked the other way. Under federal oversight, the school board integrated classrooms. Even the police force, long synonymous with selective application of the law, were subjected to cultural sensitivity training, a concept as novel to them as quantum physics. Standing on the porch of his borrowed residence, David felt the collective burden. No longer simply Jamal, the unassuming boy who blended into the background, he was David Miller, the attorney who dared to defy the status quo. Lines of exhaustion traced his face, a stark contrast to his age, yet his gaze burned with unyielding resolve. Evelyn Reed's hand rested on his forearm, a grounding presence. "Ready?" she murmured, her voice a soothing balm. He nodded, inhaling the thick, humid air. The crowd gathered in the town square was smaller than during the trial, but no less fervent. A fragile hope danced in their eyes. A tapestry of black and white, young and old, they had assembled to bid him farewell, to witness the closing of one chapter and the tentative dawn of another. His speech was simple, devoid of legal complexities or fervent pronouncements. "This wasn't about me," he stated, his voice resonating across the square. "It was about fairness, about equity, about the very promise upon which this nation was founded. The battle is not concluded. It merely commences. Tend the spark. Shield it. Let it ignite others." Emotion swept through the crowd like a summer squall. A woman, her face a roadmap of hardship, presented him with a fading magnolia. A boy barely 10 gifted him a crudely rendered drawing of the scales of justice. David accepted them, his heart overflowing with a blend of appreciation and responsibility. Meanwhile, a starkly different drama unfolded at the Harding residence. Judge Samuel Harding sat in his study, the once pristine mahogany desk now coated in neglect. The ancestral portraits, previously a source of immense pride, now seemed to watch him with silent condemnation. The telephone remained stubbornly mute, its silence a deafening indictment. He had lost his position, his authority extinguished. Whispers followed him like shadows, a perpetual reminder of his shame. The Alabama Bar Association had initiated expulsion proceedings, and the evidence against him was insurmountable. His meticulously crafted world, erected upon privilege and prejudice, had collapsed into ruin. He lifted a half-full glass of bourbon, the amber liquid trembling within. He envisioned David Miller's face. Not Jamal's guise, but the confident, articulate David, the attorney who had exposed him for the man he was. He had underestimated him, dismissed him, prejudged him based solely on race. A fatal miscalculation he would spend the rest of his days regretting. The slam of the front door reverberated through the house. He didn't bother to look up. Probably his wife, returning from yet another excruciating visit with her sister. She hadn't uttered a word in days, her silence more potent than any angry outburst. He drained the bourbon, the fiery liquid offering scant comfort to his aching soul. He was alone, adrift in a sea of his own creation. Macomb, the town he believed he understood, had transformed. And he, Samuel Harding, was an artifact of a bygone era, left to decay in the harsh light of a new beginning.